January 30th, 1945. The war is ending, but not quietly. In the frozen waters of the Baltic Sea, one of history's most desperate evacuations is underway. Operation Hannibal, the largest maritime rescue ever attempted, has mobilized over 1,000 vessels to save 2 million people trapped by the Soviet advance in East Prussia. Among these ships is the Wilhelm Gustloff, a vessel with an unusual past. Once a symbol of Nazi propaganda, a luxurious cruise liner built to offer leisure to German workers, it spent years as a floating barracks for submarine training. Now painted in standard military gray and armed with anti-aircraft guns, it has been pressed into service for one final mission: to carry thousands westward, away from the advancing Red Army. But the ship that was designed for 1,465 passengers and a crew of 417 is about to be crammed with more than 10,000 desperate souls. And what happens next will become the deadliest maritime disaster in human history. Yet for decades, this tragedy will remain nearly forgotten. More than 6 times the death toll of the Titanic, more than the Titanic and Lusitania combined, and still almost erased from collective memory. The reasons are complex. It happened in the final months of the war, when the world was already saturated with horror and tragedy. It involved Germans fleeing, and the post-war narrative offered little room for compassion toward the losing side. The Cold War that followed buried stories that didn't fit neatly into official accounts from either East or West. But the forgetting ends here, because what unfolded on that frozen night deserves to be remembered, not as propaganda, not as a footnote, but as a human tragedy of staggering proportions. This is the story of the Wilhelm Gustloff, and it begins on a brutally cold winter day at a desperate port on the edge of a collapsing empire. 12:30 p.m. Boarding begins. The Wilhelm Gustloff was not born for this. Originally, it was a symbol of Nazi propaganda, a luxury ocean liner of the Kraft durch Freude organization, Strength Through Joy, built to offer affordable cruises to German workers. Launched in 1937 in the presence of Hitler, the ship featured an indoor swimming pool, elegant salons, and comfortable cabins. But the war changed everything. For more than 4 years, the Gustloff remained anchored right here in Gotenhofen, serving as a floating barracks for training submarine crews. Its engines were neglected, its hull suffered damage. In 1940, it briefly served as Hospital Ship D during the Norway campaign, but that ended. Now it is painted in the standard gray of the German Navy. No red crosses, no white hull required by international conventions. 105mm anti-aircraft guns have been installed on deck, eliminating any protected status as a medical or civilian vessel. In the eyes of any enemy commander, the Wilhelm Gustloff is just another German warship. Now, in January 1945, it is simply one more piece in Operation Hannibal, the largest maritime evacuation in history, which will mobilize more than 1,000 vessels to remove 2 million people from East Prussia. Boarding begins with some semblance of order. Nazi officials shout names from lists. Military cadets board first. Then, in theory, women, children, and the elderly. But theory lasts only moments. The pressure of the crowd on the pier becomes unbearable. Panic overcomes bureaucracy. People begin to climb the ship's sides, clinging to cargo nets, chains, any protrusion on the frozen hull. Officers try to push the desperate back, but they soon realize it is useless. Fear is stronger than any authority. Inside the ship, Space disappears within minutes. Corridors become blocked by bodies sitting on the floor. The main staircase turns into an endless human traffic jam. The dining hall, which once hosted elegant dinners, is now covered with women and children packed together, trembling under thin blankets. The indoor swimming pool, drained years earlier, is converted into an improvised dormitory. Hundreds cram inside, breathing thick, cold air. There are not enough beds. There is not enough food. There is not adequate heating. But they are aboard, and for now, that is enough. The clock reads 12:30 p.m. when the mooring lines are released. Outside, on the frozen pier, people still watch in silence. Some wave, others simply stand there, staring at the ship departing without them. Inside, no one celebrates. They only breathe in relief. The Wilhelm Gustloff is underway. Late afternoon, January 30th. Open sea. Aboard the Wilhelm Gustloff, there is no single authority. There are 4 captains, each with their own opinions, each with valid arguments, all under extreme pressure. The first is Friedrich Petersen, a civilian merchant marine captain. He knows the ship better than anyone and knows exactly the critical condition it is in. Years without proper maintenance, structural damage from previous bombings, rusted engines barely functioning. The second is Korvettenkapitän Wilhelm Zahn, the military commander. Experienced in submarine warfare, he knows how submarines hunt, and he knows the Wilhelm Gustloff is sailing in Soviet hunting grounds. The two disagree on almost everything. Zahn advocates a coastal route in shallow waters where enemy submarines have difficulty operating. He wants lights off and maximum speed, at least 15 knots, to make torpedo targeting harder. Petersen vehemently disagrees. Maximum speed? Impossible. The ship can barely maintain 12 knots without risking catastrophic mechanical failure. High speed and rough seas could break the hull in two. Shallow waters? Dangerous. Naval mines are scattered along the coast. Deep waters are safer. Tension rises. Petersen takes command. They will sail in deep water at reduced speed. Hours pass. Then at 6 p.m., a radio message arrives that changes everything. A convoy of German minesweeping vessels is traveling the same route, but in the opposite direction. Visibility is nearly zero. Snow falls in dense squalls. A collision seems imminent. Petersen faces an impossible dilemma. Keep the lights off and risk colliding with Allied ships, or turn on the lights and become visible to the enemy. He hesitates, consults the other captains, and makes the decision. The navigation lights are switched on, green on one side, red on the other. Against the dark horizon of the Baltic Sea, the Wilhelm Gustloff now shines like a beacon, visible for kilometers. 60 kilometers off the coast, same night. Beneath the icy Baltic waves, a submarine patrols in silence. It is the S-13, a Soviet Shuka-class submarine. In command is Alexander Marinesko, a 32-year-old captain, temperamental and brilliant. Marinesko is not exactly a hero in the eyes of his superiors. Recently, he was caught intoxicated in a Finnish tavern during a mission, a serious offense that nearly resulted in court-martial. Now, on his last chance for redemption, he patrols the Baltic waters in search of German targets. And then, around 7 p.m., he sees them. Two lights, green and red, cutting through the darkness. Marinesko raises the periscope. Through lenses blurred by moisture, he sees the unmistakable silhouette of a large transport ship. He does not know how many people are aboard. He does not know that most are civilians. What he sees is an enemy ship, sailing in a war zone, armed with anti-aircraft guns. A legitimate target. For nearly 2 hours, the S-13 shadows the Wilhelm Gustloff in silence. Marinesko keeps the submarine on the surface, exploiting the distraction of the German lookouts, who scan outward toward the open sea, not behind. He positions himself with surgical precision. Calculates distance, speed, trajectory. And at 9:08 p.m., he gives the order. Fire tubes 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 torpedoes cut through the black water toward the target. The 4th torpedo fails. It becomes stuck in the launch tube. Now, the S-13 faces a deadly problem, an armed torpedo jammed inside the submarine itself. If it detonates, it will destroy the vessel from within. The Soviet crew must disarm and remove the torpedo manually while still in a combat zone. One mistake and they all die. But they succeed. The other 3 torpedoes, however, find their mark. 9:08 p.m. Impact. The first torpedo strikes the bow, below the waterline. The explosion tears a hole several meters wide in the hull. Icy water floods the forward compartments with brutal force. Watertight doors close automatically, trapping hundreds of people inside. They drown within seconds, in the dark, with no chance of escape. The second torpedo hits the area of the indoor swimming pool. The impact turns the crowded space into instant chaos. Metal fragments fly in all directions. Bodies are hurled against walls. The space plunges into total darkness. The third hits the engine room directly. All power on the ship is cut at once. The Wilhelm Gustloff plunges into absolute silence and darkness. No lights, no alarms, no communication. Only screams. Thousands of them. The corridors, already packed, become deadly traps. The ship begins to list to port, the left side. People slide over one another. Children are trampled. Mothers lose their children in the confusion. On the upper deck, the cold is the first enemy. The air temperature is -18 degrees Celsius. The seawater is 4 degrees Celsius. Anyone who falls in has at most 15 minutes of consciousness before hypothermia takes hold. Sailors try to launch the lifeboats, but the davits are frozen. They smash ice with improvised tools, but many boats fall unevenly. Others simply do not lower. Some crash onto people already in the water, killing them. The 105mm anti-aircraft guns, bolted to the deck, begin to break loose as the list increases. They slide violently, crushing everything and everyone in their path. The ship heels more and more. People trapped in interior corridors now try to climb staircases that are nearly horizontal. It is impossible. Hundreds remain trapped below, waiting for the inevitable. On deck, the wind howls. Snow falls in dense squalls. Women clutch children to their chests, but the cold is so intense they can barely move their fingers. Between 40 and 50 minutes after impact, something unexpected happens. An explosion in the boilers, caused by the brutal thermal shock between high-pressure steam and the icy Baltic water flooding the engine room. The phenomenon generates a surge of residual energy, and suddenly, all the ship's lights turn on at once. For a brief instant, the entire Wilhelm Gustloff is illuminated against the total darkness of the Baltic. And then the siren sounds. Once, long, deep. The ship's final cry. At 10:18 p.m., the Wilhelm Gustloff disappears beneath the surface. The silence that follows is absolute, but it does not last, because now, in the icy water, thousands of people struggle to survive. Some cling to debris, others try to swim toward lifeboats that are far too distant. Many simply float, paralyzed by the cold. The water temperature is so low that the human body simply shuts down. First, the extremities go numb, then breathing becomes irregular, consciousness dissolves, and then cardiac arrest. It takes between 10 and 15 minutes. Meanwhile, in the distance, some rescue vessels begin to arrive. German ships in the area pull survivors from among floating ice blocks. But for most, it is too late. About 1,250 people survive. More than 9,000 die. The vast majority from hypothermia. In the decades that follow, the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff will be investigated extensively, and the conclusion will be clear. The ship was a legitimate military target. It carried troops. It had anti-aircraft guns mounted on deck. It was painted in the war gray of the Kriegsmarine, without any hospital ship markings, without red crosses, without the white hull that would guarantee international protection. It was sailing in an active combat zone. Under international laws of war, the attack was justified. Alexander Marinesko does not receive immediate recognition. In the following years, he faces disciplinary problems and is even demoted. Only decades later, in 1990, will he be posthumously recognized as a hero of the Soviet Union. The Wilhelm Gustloff, for its part, remains where it sank. At 45 meters deep in the icy floor of the Baltic Sea, the ship rests to this day. Classified as a war grave, it is protected by law. Diving is prohibited. More than 9,000 souls remain below, in the eternal silence of dark waters. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. See you in the next video.